Thank you. Thank you, Speaker. I will be splitting my time with the member from Niagara Centre this evening as I rise to speak to Bill 17, the Protecting Ontario by Building Faster and Smarter Act. And I'd like to address the broader housing agenda of this government. It's an agenda that continues to fall short of the bold, evidence-based action Ontario's housing crisis demands. This bill is the Conservative government's latest attempt to convince Ontarians that they are tackling the housing crisis while doing very little to solve it, and in some ways making it worse. Speaker, when it comes to housing, we are not just in a supply crisis, we are in an affordability crisis. And for many, we are in a crisis of survival. And when we have an emergency, like our housing and homelessness emergency, we call 911. And people across Ontario are being crushed by the weight of this housing crisis. Rents have skyrocketed, mortgage rates have risen, evictions from people's existing homes are happening at an unprecedented rate. People are being pushed out of their communities, pushed out of their homes, and too often pushed directly into homelessness. And the numbers don't lie. It was reported by the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation that 11.5% of Ontarians will experience a core housing need. It means they cannot afford the housing they are currently in. As of 2023, the Ontario Nonprofit Housing Association found that more than 288,000 households are on the affordable housing wait list, waiting for rent-geared-to-income housing. This, Speaker, is a 10 to 12-year wait for housing that is affordable for individuals, for seniors, for families, for workers. And meanwhile, homelessness has become increasingly visible across every corner of our province. People are living in parks, in encampments, in overcrowded shelters, in stairwells, and hospitals, simply because they have nowhere else to go. And further, in 2024, before Trump returned with his disruptive and destructive tariffs, housing starts in this province under this government were down 12.5% in municipalities across the province, reaching only 81,000 out of the government's target of 125,000. And this all happened under this government. So the urgency now to make it easier to build and build faster has to make one ask, where were you for the past 8 years? Rather than advancing policies that meet the real needs of Ontarians, affordable, accessible, and sustainable housing, Bill 17 continues to ignore many of the core recommendations of this government's own Housing Affordability Task Force. Once again, we see a plan that gestures at speed and supply, but sidesteps the deeper structural solutions that experts have already laid out. This government's own hired experts. Speaker, we all remember that the Housing Affordability Task Force was created by this government. It was not an opposition initiative. It was not a grassroots consultation. This was the Conservative government's own panel of experts. And one of its top recommendations was to legalize missing middle housing as of right in all neighbourhoods across Ontario. This would mean permitting the construction of semi-detached homes, townhouses, and fourplexes in areas that have long been zoned exclusively for single-family homes. I actually want to take a minute here to read from the task force. And here's what they said. We heard from planners, municipal councillors, and developers that as-of-right zoning, the ability to bypass long, drawn-out consultations and zoning bylaw amendments, is the most effective tool in the provincial toolkit. And we agree. That is what the task force said. They go on. Too much land inside cities is tied up by outdated rules. For example, it's estimated that 70% of land zoned for housing in Toronto is restricted to single, detached, or semi-detached homes. This type of zoning prevents homeowners from adding additional suites to create housing for Ontarians and income for themselves. As one person said, my neighbour can tear down what was there to build a monster home, but I'm not allowed to add a basement suite to my home. Speaker, that one single change, if implemented, could unlock housing supply in every municipality in this province. And that is what we are told this government wants to do. It would allow modest density in existing neighbourhoods, gentle density. It would give more families, more workers, seniors a chance to live near transit, near schools, and near their jobs. Now, as a member of council in Ottawa at the time that this report was published, I knew that this was the direction we needed to end exclusionary zoning that keeps young people out of housing, keeps renters out of neighbourhoods, and keeps housing and rental prices high across the city. I was actually looking forward to what this government was going to do. Yet this government dismissed that recommendation outright and continues to. Instead of acting on that expert advice, this government has brought forward Bill 17, a bill that seeks to speed up housing and infrastructure delivery, but in reality it does neither at a rate that this moment calls for. This bill does not legalize missing middle housing. It does not fund affordable housing. It does not address the growing encampment crisis. It does not require a single unit of housing to be affordable to those who are of modest and middle income, who are currently unhoused, or who are at risk of homelessness. The Conservative government defines affordable housing as units priced at 80% of the average market rent. But in large cities like Toronto, that still means that a one-bedroom unit could cost nearly $1,700 a month. That's their affordability. That's not affordable for someone working a minimum wage job. That's not affordable for someone on ODSP. And that's not affordable for the majority of renters in this province. In fact, Speaker, a 2023 report by Acorn Canada found that more than 80% of new affordable units built under this definition were still unaffordable for low and moderate income people, moderate income earners. So who are these homes really being built for? Instead of addressing key issues, this bill continues to let the most vulnerable Ontarians fall through the cracks. It certainly offers no guarantee of housing for the 80,000 Ontarians who have no housing, or the thousands who are living in overcrowded shelters where there is no room for anyone to move out of an encampment into, no relief for renters being priced out of their neighbourhoods, and no meaningful pathway to affordable or supportive housing. For the thousands of Ontarians facing eviction, homelessness, or impossible housing costs, Bill 17 offers nothing but empty promises and more delays. Affordability, Speaker, is not a luxury. It is the foundation of housing policy. And if the government is not addressing affordability, it is not properly addressing the crisis. Speaker, why is this government so resistant to evidence? Why is it unwilling to act on the central finding of its own task force. The task force laid bare the consequences of inaction. And I'll read from it again. Black and Indigenous homeownership rates are less than half the provincial average, and homelessness rates among Indigenous people are 11 times the national average, and this is not going to change. As the report itself warned, when housing prevents an individual from reaching their full potential, this represents a loss to every Ontarian. Lost creativity, lost productivity, lost revenue, and lost prosperity for individuals and for the entire Ontario economy. When will this government stop choosing delay and denial and finally choose to act? Speaker, the scale of the housing shortage in Ontario is not in dispute. A 2021 Scotiabank study found that Canada has the fewest housing units per capita of any G7 country, and that supply has actually declined for the past 7 years. An update released in 2022 found that 2/3 of Canada's housing shortage is right here in Ontario. According to that report, Ontario is now $1.2 million short of the G7 average, either rental or owned. And yet, we are not operating in a data vacuum. We know what types of housing are needed and where they are needed. The Housing Assessment Resource Tool, HART, was developed by leading researchers at the University of British Columbia and supported by the federal government. It provides detailed community-level data on housing needs across Ontario. You can look it up, you can go onto any neighbourhood, you can go into any city, and you can find out who needs what housing, where, and at what cost. The federal government actually made the housing needs assessment mandatory for municipalities receiving funding through the Housing Accelerator Fund. It shows us that the overwhelming demand is for rental housing that is affordable to low, moderate, and middle-income households. That is the unmet need. Affordable homes close to services and transit. Bill 17 does not deliver that housing. It does not allocate resources to it. It does not even acknowledge what types of housing should be built, for whom, and at what cost. Nonprofit and co-op housing providers are being shut out of land acquisition, denied financing, and pushed to the sidelines in favor of profit over people. And yet this government continues to insist that the problem is red tape alone. But I ask, what piece of red tape is preventing someone from affording rent? What zoning variance is forcing a person to sleep in a tent through the winter? I've never had one person sleeping outside or in a shelter talk to me about what type of zoning they need. What people need is housing that they can afford, where they can afford it. The truth is so simple. Housing costs have completely outpaced wages. People are working full-time jobs and still cannot afford a place to live. Even the government's own task force made it clear over the past decades, house prices have increased by 180%, while average incomes have risen by only 38%. People need housing available to middle-income, moderate-income, and low-income households. They need supportive housing, and they need public investment. They need a real path to stability. And this bill offers no such path. Bill 17 also raises serious questions about the erosion of municipal standards and tenant protections. Instead of encouraging the kind of dense, transit-oriented, and climate-resilient housing that Ontarians need, this bill will continue to promote sprawl that will pave over farmland, increase gashouse emissions, and drive up the cost of public services. The Toronto Green Standard, which is a key tool in ensuring new buildings are environmentally sustainable, may now be at risk. Bill 17 seeks to speed up the construction of housing, which is a good goal, and growth-related infrastructure, again, another good goal. But it does so by eliminating regulatory requirements, which is precisely how cities implement green building standards. The Toronto Green Standard ensures that new developments are energy efficient, climate resilient, and transit supportive. It reduces greenhouse gas emissions, it improves air quality, and lowers long-term utility costs. Benefits that matter most to low-income renters and future generations, our kids, your kids. Green building standards also make housing more affordable. In Ottawa, I was on the board of Ottawa Community Housing, and we redeveloped a housing neighbourhood in the ward that I represented. We took down 27 townhomes that were at the end of their life cycle, and we built 41 new homes for people. It was a 6-story low-rise with some stacked homes in the back, just behind. Just across the street, we took down another 99 townhomes that were at the end of their life cycle. And they are currently building approximately 500 new homes. And these are not all deeply affordable. It's a mixed income community. But these homes by Ottawa Community Housing, built by Ottawa Community Housing, a public builder, were built to net zero and passive standards. And do you know what that means for people who are living there, people who are already of low income? Their heating and cooling costs per year, annual heating and cooling costs for a unit is $200. It's what most of us pay in a month. So having good standards for building means that people can afford their housing. And not just people on low incomes, it's something we should all aspire to. If we want to make housing more affordable for people, make it more efficient. But under Bill 17, the province is seemingly taking steps to centralize control over local planning decisions, including site plan approvals. This opens the door for the minister to override municipal requirements like the Toronto Green Standard, removing the ability of cities like Toronto to enforce energy performance standards that exceed the Ontario Building Code. This isn't just about whether municipalities can go beyond the building code. It's about whether this government will keep its promise. Back in 2023, then Minister of Housing committed to passing a regulation under the Building Code Act that would allow municipalities to maintain green development standards by selecting from a range of provincially authorized options. This was always the government's proposed transition plan, that municipalities would continue setting energy performance standards, like the Toronto Green Standard, but under a standardized framework within the building code. It wasn't ideal. Organizations like the Toronto Atmospheric Fund expressed concern about relying on the province to follow through, but it was a compromise many were willing to accept. In good faith, the City of Toronto began working with the government to align the Green Standard with this new framework, expecting that the required regulation would be passed. But it never was. And now, with Bill 17 moving forward and no clear commitment from this government, municipalities are once again left in the dark. It is not helpful for the government to keep saying that municipalities won't be allowed to exceed the building code, because the question is not whether they'll be allowed to do that. The question is whether the government will keep its promise to pass a regulation that enables municipalities to maintain existing green development standards under the building code. Building homes should not mean bulldozing wetlands and farmland. It should not mean gutting conservation authorities. It should not mean locking in a future of climate vulnerability. Speaker, there is no disagreement that we need to build homes, but we should be building homes that are sustainable, equitable, and future-proof. We should be enabling municipalities to develop these projects, not overriding their authority. The same concern is raised for rental replacement bylaws, which require developers to replace affordable units when they propose to demolish them. These protections were already undermined by Bill 23, and now they are seemingly, quietly threatened again. Again, in Ottawa, we continue to lose affordable market rental housing. People get pushed out of their neighborhoods when demevictions happen, when renovictions happen. We lose something like 31 affordable rental units for every one new unit built. And people are sentenced to homelessness when they lose their housing, the only affordable housing they have. If there's 31 gone, you're hardly likely to get that one that was built. And the provision here to eliminate rental control on purpose-built rental properties built after 2018 is an incentive for landlords and developers and REITs to knock down and rebuild. Oh, they come in, they know that they have a rent-controlled unit, they have rental-controlled units within their buildings, and they knock them down and they rebuild. Because that loophole means there is no rent control. They can be gouged and their rent can be increased to the point where they're pushed out of their housing. Bill 17 seems to allow the Minister of Infrastructure also to override municipal decisions with MZOs. And this is not about efficiency or consistency, it is about power and to fast-track projects that may not serve the public interest. Speaker, when you chip away at these protections, you are not cutting red tape. You are cutting climate action. You are cutting affordability. You are cutting tenant stability. And you are cutting municipal authority. We also must not forget the damage already done by Bill 23, which stripped municipalities of significant development charge revenue. And at that time, this government promised to make municipalities whole. Speaker, has that happened? Have cities received the revenue they lost to cover growth-related infrastructure? No, they have not. Perhaps this government is waiting for the federal government to make good on its election promise to pay municipalities 50% of lost DC revenue. Maybe that is an answer we can get. Is that where we're looking for the money? Bill 17 now further amends the Development Charges Act without addressing the fiscal holes this government created in towns and cities across Ontario. Funds that are required for essential services in new neighbourhoods like water, wastewater, roads, sidewalks, transit, libraries, recreation centres. Let's not forget that this government has issued more MZOs in the past 5 years than all previous governments combined. Many of these have been used to push through development on sensitive land or to benefit a select few. Well-connected select few, as we've learned. At the time, municipalities are being stripped of their ability to collect development charges, which again they use to fund critical infrastructure. The City of Toronto alone has warned that Bill 23 and related policies could cost them more than $2 billion in lost revenue. And we know that municipalities today cannot afford to keep up their infrastructure costs. They receive 10 cents on every dollar that is earned from taxes, and they are responsible for 17% of expenditures. They continue to go in the hole, and they are the level of government closest to people, providing things, like I say, like recreation, like libraries, like the things that people need in their communities. And how are municipalities supposed to support new housing without the funds to build the infrastructure it requires? How can we expect communities to grow sustainably if we are undercutting their ability to plan, build, and pay for essential services? Bill 17 also extends the powers granted under the Building Transit Faster Act and seemingly expands the reach of the Minister of Infrastructure over transit-oriented communities. But let's look at the government's record on this. The Mimico Transit-Oriented Community, touted as a flagship project, collapsed when the private partner went bankrupt. Today there is nothing there, a hole in the ground where housing was promised. And no one needs a reminder of the debacle that was the Ottawa LRT, a failed P3 so poorly built and maintained that this government was forced to call for an inquiry into the system. A new train, brand new train that derailed within months, broke down almost daily, had wheels that had trouble remaining round. They were square. They actually were square wheels. Yeah. Tracks falling apart after only months of operation. And yet this government now asks the public to trust it with even more power to hand over public infrastructure to private entities without oversight and without results. It doesn't work. Instead of working in partnership with municipalities, this government is sidelining them. Instead of listening to local residents, it is silencing them. If we are serious about solving the housing crisis, we need to work collaboratively across all levels of government, not bulldoze over local democracy in the name of speed. Speaker, the housing crisis is complex, but the solutions are not a mystery. The government has the roadmap. It paid for the roadmap. It chose its own experts to give it the roadmap, and now it is choosing to ignore it. Real leadership means legalizing missing middle housing, as the task force recommended, investing in deeply affordable and supportive housing, not just market rate units, and protecting rental house stock through rental replacement bylaws, preserving environmental standards, and ensuring municipalities have the fiscal tools they need to support growth. Instead, Bill 17 is another missed opportunity, another step away from affordability and stability. Speaker, Ontarians deserve better. They deserve a government that builds the housing they need. The missed opportunities from a government that took Ontarians to the poll this winter almost 2 years earlier than necessary to get a stronger mandate to protect Ontario have already begun to add up. The first order of business for this new legislature was a government speech from the throne outlining key government initiatives, and what we got was heavy on rhetoric but light on relief, message that failed to meaningfully address the serious issues facing our province, with no plans to build affordable housing, fix publicly funded and publicly delivered health care, invest in critical infrastructure, double ODSP and OW, restore rent controls, or protect workers threatened by tariffs. Since then, we've been presented with a number of pieces of legislation tabled by the government that followed a similar style before substance pattern. One of those bills, the Protect Ontario by Unleashing Our Economy Act, has First Nations and environmental groups raising alarm bells for its gutting of the Ontario Endangered Species Act and disregard for free, prior and informed consent on the Ring of Fire. The Safer Municipalities Act doubles down on expensive and failed policies to address people without housing and without shelter, the most desperate, marginalized people in our province. And it will cost taxpayers more without any meaningful impact to address the growing and persistent unhoused and unsheltered population. And as I pointed out in my debate on this bill, there are other jurisdictions, other provinces, for example, led by Manitoba's Premier, Wab Kinew, making meaningful progress on ending encampments by housing people. And that's why he's Canada's most popular Premier. In the face of Trump's economic threats and a cost of living crisis that continues to spiral out of control, now is the time to be strengthening and building Ontario, not cutting corners and delaying necessary investments. So, while there are things to support in this bill, get it to second reading, we need questions answered. It does not do what is required in this extraordinary time. My priorities and those of our party over the coming months and throughout this term will be shaped from what we heard from people on their doorsteps, what people are telling us they need to make their lives more affordable. We will continue to advocate for new and bold direction, including thousands of permanently affordable non-market homes, built quickly, with rent control and strong tenant protections, a fast-tracked and concrete plan for school repairs, better transit service, and critical public infrastructure. We'll push for supportive housing solutions for our neighbours living in overcrowded shelters and in encampments, with access to wraparound mental health and addiction supports. We will push for investments in training and apprenticeships, especially for youth, newcomers, underrepresented workers, to build the workforce we need now and into the future. And a clear plan to retain healthcare workers and hire more to fill the growing need for healthcare. Now, there is some good news lately in the rental market, with one-bedroom rents going down. It's 5% decrease in the rental rate in Mississauga and about 9% here in Toronto. But at the same time, we've seen rents in other places increase because people in Ontario now are driving until they can afford housing, and they are driving literally across the province. The average one-bedroom apartment, according to Live Rent, here in downtown Toronto is $2,200 a month. But this leveling off is still unaffordable across the province. We know that rents have increased, on average, 30% since the pandemic. This is more than just a supply problem. The minister, in introducing this bill, 17, talked about a sense of urgency to build purpose-built rentals, to supportive and affordable housing, to transit-oriented communities, and to single-family homes. But there is nothing here that will address the absolute crisis that people are in today. And as housing expert Carolyn Weitzman reminds us, we need to be serious about who needs what housing, where, and at what cost. To start with, we need one definition of affordability. That is no more than 30% of pre-tax household income. This is the CMHC definition, and the use of 5 income categories. This is the work of HART based on Canadian and U.S. best practice. And it should be linked to the average median household income. We need to consider what people who are very low income, people making less than 20% of average median household income, what housing they need and at what price. Low income, 21 to 50% of average median income, household income, moderate and higher income. In general, very low and low-income individuals and households are most at risk of homelessness. Moderate and median income households are also being left behind in terms of affordable and secure housing. And moderate and median income seniors are worried about aging in place and need rental accommodation near where they live today with services. And as Professor Weitzman has so often pointed out, if you're talking about a $2,000 a month for a one-bedroom apartment, that means that a middle-class household needs to be content living in a one-bedroom apartment. But if you're a moderate-class household, say a nurse or a teacher, or if you're low income, the very workers we count on in our service industry, it is impossible to find a two-bedroom place to rent. There is simply no housing in our urban centres and many of our cities and many of our towns for people who are moderate and low income. Now, before we throw our hands up and give up here, the provincial government could move immediately to acquire units in order to keep their affordability, acquire them and turn them over to nonprofits and co-ops to operate. We know that for every new affordable unit built in this province, we lose so many more to rent evictions and dem evictions. We could change zoning and building codes immediately to make it easier to build those low-rise and mid-rise apartments that families need. We could put in place tenant protection, rent controls, strong short-term rental bylaws, get rid of vacancy decontrol and make all units covered by rent control, and we can tighten up above guideline increases. People simply cannot afford to foot the bill for these measures aimed at increasing profit alone. Under the National Housing Strategy, apartment construction loan program, which was about $55 billion, saw very little affordable housing built. But we know that units built by nonprofits have rents that are 20% less after 20 years and 33% after 30 years because they are not maximizing profits. So the political headlines could be, we are going to enable a new generation of low-priced family homes near jobs, transit, and service. It could be, we are going to protect renter rights. It could be, we're going to end chronic homelessness. Or it could be, we are going to create a new generation of options for seniors to age in place. Speaker, Bill 17 is not a real housing plan. It will not make homes more affordable. It will not address homelessness. It will not build the kind of inclusive, livable, climate-resilient communities that Ontarians deserve. We are in the middle of the worst housing crisis in a generation. People need real solutions, they need leadership, and they need a government that puts people and not profits first. Speaker, I urge this government to go back, listen to housing experts, listen to municipalities, listen to Ontarians, and bring forward legislation that actually addresses the crisis, not just the headlines. Thank you, Speaker.
Member from Niagara Centre.
Thank you, Speaker, and pleased to rise and give some comments on Bill 17. I want to thank my colleague from Ottawa Centre for their words, and I know we all feel in our caucus privileged to have such a great bunch of new members. My friend from Hamilton Centre, from Ottawa Centre, and Parkdale High Park are doing a great job, all the new members that I've heard actually on all sides of the House, really impressed by their work. This bill I would characterize as being not so good, not so bad, and certainly does not rise to the occasion of the housing crisis. I think most folks, the comments that I've heard, would agree with that. But there are some bright spots in it, and I've been the municipal affairs critic since 2018. And over the last couple of years, I've been part of a traveling committee on governance, and that committee has garnered a lot of really good consultation from municipalities who have taken part in it, traveled around to two-tier municipalities and heard from on all kinds of issues. Use it or lose it was a good example of a policy that we were pushing for a long time. The government heard loud and clear from municipalities during those committee hearings in places like Waterloo and others, and they implemented a certain version of that. In this bill, there's housing enabling infrastructure for water, wastewater, desperately needed, and something I think the government heard loud and clear from municipalities as that committee traveled. And also smaller municipalities without housing targets. It's good to see that being considered. I'm not sure how this bill is going to roll out in terms of that, but I come from a small municipality, Thorold, where I live, and they've been begging for housing targets because they're the 8th fastest growing municipality in all of Canada and are far exceeding every expectation, but they weren't able to tap into those funds. And I'm not sure how I feel about these housing targets or if they've really done any good, but if there's going to be a fund for municipalities to take advantage of, I think we should have a system that's fair for all municipalities. So I hope that Thorold and other small municipalities without housing targets become part of that. And we must do better in municipalities like Niagara. I'm going to talk a little bit about some infrastructure issues in Niagara. I know a couple of my colleagues, my friend from St. Catharines raised some questions in question period this morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And there are a lot of concerns in this bill around infrastructure as well. So while we do support many aspects of this bill, I am in agreement with a lot of housing and municipal affairs experts who say that it really doesn't meet the moment. So we're hoping to see a lot more. John McGrath, for an example, from TVO said both provincial and federal governments acknowledge we're in a housing crisis, but the package of measures announced in this bill doesn't really meet the moment. Under the cover of the crisis, the government's giving the development industry in Toronto specifically 2 clear favors, but those measures will be of limited importance elsewhere in the province. Many of the other measures announced might someday end up being more than marginal, but we'll have to wait and see. And as someone who hoped that the newly elected government would at least use some of its political capital right after an election to take some big swings on the housing file, this bill is a letdown for many people and a worrying primer for the next 4 years. And I tend to agree with McGrath. This government was elected on a mandate to get Ontario building, but the bill misses the mark when it comes to building affordable homes, especially as my friend from Ottawa spoke about. Last year, Ontario was on track to record the lowest number of annual housing starts for detached homes since records began in 1955. At this rate, we'll never reach the 1.5 million home target. It's another housing bill that still does not implement top recommendations of the Housing Affordability Task Force, which my friend also mentioned, including legalizing missing middle housing options like semis, townhouses, and fourplexes in all neighbourhoods. And these types of homes would be more affordable options for a wider range of income levels. In 2023, housing starts declined by 7% in Ontario, while in British Columbia, where the government adopted many recommendations from Ontario's Housing Affordability Task Force, housing starts rose by 11%. According to the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, urban housing starts in Ontario are down 17% from 2023, in stark contrast to increases of 30% in Quebec and 35% in Alberta. In November 2024 alone, monthly housing starts jumped by 143% in Montreal. and 52% in Vancouver. Compared to the same month in 2023, while remaining completely flat in Toronto. Data published recently by the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation showed that housing starts in Ontario in March were down 46% year over year for communities with 10,000 people or more. Ultimately, this bill falls short of addressing the urgent housing crisis we are facing. There are limitations on municipalities' ability to impose inclusionary zoning, as has been mentioned. It's a new regulation that was first proposed 3 years ago and only enacted now. It represents a substantial reduction in the ability of municipalities to impose inclusionary zoning rules in their cities near protected major transit station areas. As McGrath also pointed out, Toronto had adopted rules requiring up to 22% of gross floor area to be dedicated to affordable housing for a period of 99 years. Provincial rules will limit that to only 5% of floor area for 25 years. So the NDP has been advocating for the government to enable inclusionary zoning bylaws for over a decade. Critics of inclusionary zoning claim it's effectively a tax on development and a disincentive to home construction. A badly designed inclusionary zoning policy could indeed be that, Speaker, but properly designed, an inclusionary zoning policy should function as a form of land value capture. That is a tax on speculative profit the landowner did nothing to earn. Had inclusionary zoning bylaws been in place 10 years ago, municipalities might have been able to capture more of the rising land values for the public's benefit, instead of these gains flowing to landowners in the form of speculation profit. And we've been talking about this since 2018, the need to clamp down on speculation. In a time of housing affordability crises, especially in cities like Toronto, this reduction will significantly limit the availability of affordable homes for low and moderate income residents. Now, as I mentioned, there are some bright spots in the bill, and one of those is the level of collaboration between municipal partners. It is a positive step to see the government working more collaboratively with partners, something we've been calling for after several years of a very heavy top-down approach from this government. In a statement on the bill, Amos said, "This legislation is a marked departure from Bill 23, which we all remember, which introduced significant across-the-board reductions and discounts to development charges. This new bill provides the framework, changes, and room to consult on how best to accomplish them in future regulations." So I hope that in committee this bill undergoes some changes and we see some of those assurances from the government. AMO continues to call for adequate, predictable, and sustainable provincial funding for municipal infrastructure. As we all recall, Bill 23 took away development charge revenues that municipalities count on to build infrastructure, community services, and housing. The minister at the time promised to make municipalities whole, a promise that was never fulfilled, and I'm not sure how many questions I've asked in this place about when the government would fulfill its promise to make municipalities whole from Bill 23, and it's never happened. And it results in higher taxes, obviously, double-digit tax increases, and cuts in municipal services. Lindsay Jones, AMO Director of Policy and Government Relations, said this is not another Bill 23. So hopefully we're heading in a more positive direction. This is a bill that was developed with prior collaboration. The recent announcement included the government increasing its investment in housing-enabling infrastructure, which I've mentioned, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Niagara in a moment. From what I can see and judging from what I've heard in past committee work from various regions that we visited last term, this government seems to have listened to what a lot of those municipalities told them, especially around that issue of enabling water wastewater infrastructure and funds for municipalities that don't have housing targets. I'd like to talk for a few moments about housing in Niagara. Ultimately, the goal of this bill is to build more housing, yet the government has been in power for nearly a decade, and people in my riding tell me they've yet to see any changes that have made housing more affordable in Niagara. As a matter of fact, it's getting worse. Housing affordability was one of the top concerns among residents in the last elections. It was all what I heard was healthcare and housing. According to Nanos, 72% of respondents believe affordability in the Niagara region has worsened over the past 5 years. 89% agree that it's more difficult to find housing now than it was 5 years ago. And that's a clear failure on the part of this government with respect to the region that I'm from. 1 in 3 residents indicated they're considering leaving Niagara in search of more affordable housing options. 89% believe it is significantly harder for young people and first-time homebuyers to afford a home in the region today compared to 5 years ago. This bill will not ensure the delivery of new housing for people living in encampments or on the streets, as my friend from Ottawa mentioned. It does not provide for direct public investment in affordable housing, as the NDP has long called for. Niagara Region's by name list recorded 1,136 individuals experiencing homelessness at the end of 2024. That's something that obviously shouldn't be happening. The primary reasons for homelessness: conflict with the landlord, 24%, financial hardship, 20%, unsafe housing conditions, which I'm hearing more and more of in Niagara, 12%. And the barriers are the rent is too high, income is too low, housing conditions are poor, there's discrimination, and especially discrimination around mental health. Now, I want to turn for a moment to something I mentioned earlier, and my colleague from St. Catharines talked about it in question period this morning, asked the minister about a South Niagara wastewater treatment plant, which the local government and local government officials in Niagara are not getting the answers that we believe they should be getting from this government. It's not being taken with the seriousness that it should be. There was a recent article in our daily newspaper in Niagara from Bill Sawchuk that talked about Niagara mayors warning both the federal and provincial governments that their lack of support for a new $500 million wastewater treatment plant will definitely stall local development and endanger housing starts. Now, we're in a crisis. We have a monumental issue in Niagara, and we're not getting answers from the government. If we don't put a full court press on this project, we're going to be shutting down development in Niagara. That's from the Mayor of Thorold, Terry Ugolini. With the new government and ministers coming in, we need to ensure we're front and center and step up to the plate. Everyone knows we need this, but in recent inquiries, we've gotten nowhere. The South Niagara wastewater treatment plant is the largest single infrastructure project in the upper-tier municipality's history. It'll be on 44 hectares, equivalent to about 30 Canadian football fields. It'll handle about 30 million litres of wastewater daily, with the treated outfall going into the Chippewa Creek. Construction of the facility was expected to start in 2027, and once complete, it would serve Niagara Falls, parts of Thorold, St. Catharines, Niagara-on-the-Lake, and reduce some of the infrastructure strain on those communities, and many of whom are trying to build housing as quickly as possible. The region's official plan projects Niagara's population will grow by more than 214,000 residents by 2051, bringing the total to almost 700,000. And for its part, Niagara Falls has a provincially assigned housing target of 8,000 units by 2031. And those are, of course, in danger. That's what the mayors are saying. The fact that the plant's funding package isn't in place has concerned many of the mayors, including Mayor Cisco, who said he's getting nowhere with government representatives. And this government that says they're serious about housing, but they're getting nowhere with this government when it comes to enabling infrastructure that the region is completely dependent on to build new housing. The overriding message I was given from the government, said the mayor, was stop looking to us to figure out how to fund this project. You need to come forward with a better plan than what we've been presented. So the region's chief administrator officer said the only real alternative without federal and provincial assistance is having Niagara taxpayers fund the project through water rates. And so there you go, what we were talking about earlier, that the government can come forward with whatever they want to build, but if they're not willing to actually take action in the areas of the province that desperately need it, housing starts are going to stall. How bad is it? The Niagara Falls plant recently violated federal wastewater systems regulations for the second time in just more than a year. And this is infrastructure that's already in place. Discharge sample collected on April 26th for testing by the federal government killed 80% of rainbow trout in a lab tank over a 96-hour period. That's how bad it is. A result exceeding 50% is considered non-compliant. So this is existing infrastructure that's not working, and if it's not replaced, not only will this dangerous situation continue, but we can forget about housing starts in the future because that's going to stall. The province's More Homes Built Faster Act isn't helping with the new plant's financing, and the folks in the region are desperate. Niagara Falls Councillor Joyce Morocco said permits are sitting and waiting for builders to develop, but municipalities need improved infrastructure. So that's a situation, Speaker, that is a specific situation, and just coming up with a bill that puts money into a fund, if the government is not speaking to the municipalities that need that money and finding ways to partner with the federal government and the municipal government, these projects are not going to move forward in time for them to have a real effect. I can remember I was a councillor with my friend from St. Catharines. We were on the same council in St. Catharines together for 8 years, and I was elected in 2006 to that council, and we all remember the financial collapse in 2008, and the federal government coming out with an infrastructure program. Conservative federal government, huge infrastructure stimulus package, and that was based on a one-third share between the federal government, the province, and the municipality. And we built all kinds of projects with that fund, and that's obviously the way forward for giant infrastructure projects like this that exist not only in Niagara but all over the province. The province needs to come to the table, and they don't need to pay for the whole thing. If they have a certain amount of money in the enabling fund, then that money is something the government decides on the amount of. But we know how much the project in Niagara costs, and if the province doesn't come up with 1/3, and if they don't partner with the federal government, then the municipality is not going to be able to build that critical infrastructure. So it needs to happen, and it needs to happen soon. So I would encourage this government not to just come forward with bills like this one that, as most people agree, don't meet the moment. We're happy that they've put more money into that fund. We're happy that they've listened to municipalities in some areas, like smaller municipalities who do not have housing targets. But they have to be more targeted. They have to listen to municipalities like Niagara who come forward and want to work with them and partner with the federal and provincial government to make sure that these projects move forward. So, Speaker, I'm not going to have time to speak about green standards, but my friend from Ottawa did a great job with that. There are a lot of questions in this bill. I did want to mention that there was some confusion last week when we asked for a briefing. It was actually my friend from the Liberals asked for a briefing, and our researcher in the NDP caucus was told that they weren't welcome in the briefing. That's the first time I've seen that as the municipal affairs critic over the last almost 8 years. Usually those briefings are there for a specific purpose, which is not always partisan. It's actually so that we can all understand the bill and understand which parts are actually in the bill and which are regulations that can be enacted, and ask other questions. So I'm troubled by that, and I hope we work that out with the government, because when we have briefings, those should be open to both staff and politicians from all parties. Thank you very much, Speaker.
Thank you. Questions? Questions? I recognize the member from Thornhill.
Thank you, Speaker. Thank you very much for the member opposite's thoughtful conversations. One of the things that this bill provides is something that's probably near and dear to everyone in this room, which is supportive housing and affordable rentals and long-term care homes. And this bill will actually remove and eliminate the DC charges to spur on faster construction. So does the opposition support these cost-saving reforms that will help these institutions, these places, get built a little faster?
I recognize the member from Ottawa Centre.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. And yes, the reduction of DCs for long-term care homes is a good indicator, absolutely. It's not clear if that's just for not-for-profit long-term care homes, or if it's also for profit, which we know we've had considerable issues with. And those are questions that we will seek answers to in committee. But just to be clear, I think that when we're talking about supportive housing, what we need for supports is actual operating, operating dollars, so that we can wrap around mental health and addictions services for people who need it. Those types of support. So we will be looking further to that, and look forward to much more conversation. Thank you.
Question? I recognize the member from St. Catharines.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to my colleagues. Thank you for your explanation of what is and isn't into the Bill 17 here. But I want to highlight to my colleague from Niagara Centre. He mentioned about the South Niagara wastewater treatment plant, which is quite an issue right now within the Thorold, Niagara Falls, and St. Catharines. And with new housing developments in Thorold encroaching into my riding of St. Catharines, the treatment plant needs to be operating at full capacity to serve the growth of the population. With Schedule 4 in this bill changes how development charges are applied, but let's be clear, development charges are how municipalities fund infrastructure. So, like wastewater plants, so we can't be looking at local taxpayers should not be expected to foot the bill for projects through projects like this and making their property taxes skyrocket. I do believe that we have worked together with the municipalities, have worked with federal, they've worked with the province and the municipalities, one-third to get things done. But I'm not hearing that from this government, and I'm not seeing it in this bill, that the provincial government will not go to
I recognize the member from Niagara Centre.
Thank you, Speaker. I think the problem with the way the government approaches development charges is they're looking at it in a very short-term way, as a way to make things easier for their friends in the development community, rather than looking at it as a long-term strategy. So in Niagara, something like the wastewater treatment facility, the new one that needs to be built, that's a long-term strategy. And so the tinkering around with development charges that this government's doing in the bill is going to do nothing to provide the actual long-term infrastructure and solve those long-term problems that municipalities like Niagara are facing.
Question? Question? I recognize the member for Niagara West.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and appreciate the member from Niagara Centre for contributing to debate this evening by sharing his perspectives on Niagara, and I'm glad always to hear a fellow colleague from Niagara bring forward Niagara issues. I will say he talked about water-enabling water systems, but he didn't talk about the funding that is actually already flowing into the Niagara region through those grants. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more about how, you know, the $20 million to Welland, the $13 million to Lincoln, the almost $20 million to Niagara Falls, $4 million to West Lincoln, and millions of dollars to St. Catharines as well through that fund. What that's already doing in terms of building out water-enabling infrastructure in the Niagara region, and if you could share a little bit about what you heard from those in the community who obviously wanted to see more housing built, specifically in the home building community, and why they thought that was such a good program.
The Niagara Centre.
Yeah, thank you, Speaker. I did mention in my comments that there are some positive aspects of the bill, the $400 million, and we all want to see money flowing to our communities, but in relation to the huge problem that this treatment facility presents, that needs a specific solution. It needs partnership with the federal and provincial government. It's not going to be helped by these funds that are flowing to individual communities, which are very welcomed. I am hoping that communities like the one that I live in Thorold, will be able to be rewarded for the success of their home building efforts, because they've been left out up to this point. So there are definitely some positive aspects of the bill, and I hope that in committee we work out more of the details of those things.
Question? I recognize the member from Beaches, East York.
Thank you. Thank you very much to my colleague from the member from Welland. I miss being on the committee with you. We had some good times. And I know how hard you fight for housing to be built in Ontario. And I'm just wondering what you think of what Bill 17 is doing to the green design standards right across Ontario.
Member for Niagara Centre.
Thank you, Speaker. That's a really good question, and very difficult to answer, because what is actually happening with green standards is a bit murky. So what you're seeing out there in the media is people trying to understand exactly what is happening with green standards. There's a lot of commentary that a lot of the efforts that municipalities are making around their plans, most of them have to do with sustainability. That's the word sustainability is in most municipalities' plans, and part built into that are green standards for buildings in their municipalities. So when the federal government comes along and unilaterally changes those things and lowers standards, that has a ripple effect on all the municipalities that have been working so hard with green standards to work toward zero emissions in their communities.
Time for a short question and response. Question? I recognize. Recognize Thunder Bay, Superior North.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I understand that Toronto had, so thank you to my colleagues from Ottawa South Centre and Niagara South. Centre. They're both centres. Okay. I understand that Toronto had adopted rules requiring up to 22% of gross floor area to be dedicated to affordable housing for a period of 99 years. But the new provincial rules will limit that to 5% of floor area for 25 years. So this seems like a deliberate reduction of a requirement to build affordable housing. Member from Ottawa, would you like to comment on that?
Recognize the member for Ottawa Centre.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for that question. You know, when we provide added density bonuses to developers, when we build out our LRT and our transit into transit-oriented communities, one of the ways that we ask for something back is through what's called inclusionary zoning, which is the opposite of exclusionary zoning. It means that people can live together in mixed communities, mixed income communities. So really that reduction to 5% for such a low period of time really will make very little difference in any affordability in any municipality. So that it was certainly a disappointment to see. Thank you.